Blood trickled from Eliza Morgan's swollen nose as she stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Her once vibrant green eyes now dulled with fear, her delicate features distorted by the brutal hand of the man who had vowed to love and protect her. It was the spring of 1875 in the unforgiving territory of Wyoming, and at 23 years old, Eliza knew that if she didn't leave tonight, she might never leave at all. The sound of her husband's drunken snoring echoed from their bedroom, giving her the precious minutes she needed. Carefully, she gathered what little she could carry: a change of clothes, the small leather pouch containing her mother's wedding ring, and the meager savings she had managed to hide beneath the loose floorboard in the pantry. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough to start anew somewhere far from Horace Morgan's reach. Eliza's trembling fingers fumbled with the back door latch. 3 years of marriage had taught her exactly which floorboards creaked and how to move like a ghost through her own home. The cool night air hit her bruised face as she slipped outside, causing her to wince. The pain was a stark reminder of why she had to leave, why she couldn't endure another day as Horace Morgan's wife. The small town of Pinewood was still and quiet under the vast Wyoming sky as Eliza made her way to the train station. Each step took tremendous effort. Her ribs ached from where Horace's boot had connected with them 2 days prior. But the pain only strengthened her resolve. She would not die in this town. She would not become another sad tale whispered among the womenfolk. The station was empty save for the night attendant, who barely glanced up from his newspaper when she purchased a ticket for the next train heading east. Where exactly, she didn't care. Anywhere would be better than here. "Train's due in 20 minutes, madam," the attendant said, finally looking up. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her face, but he asked no questions. In frontier towns like Pinewood, a woman with bruises was an all-too-common sight. "Thank you," Eliza replied softly, keeping her head down as she moved to sit on a bench in the darkest corner of the platform. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Every sound made her flinch, expecting to see Horace's hulking figure coming to drag her back home. But the station remained quiet, with only the occasional hoot of an owl breaking the silence. When the distant rumble of the approaching train finally reached her ears, Eliza allowed herself to breathe. The massive iron beast pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and billowing steam. She rose to her feet, clutching her small bag to her chest. Then she heard it, the sound that had haunted her nightmares for 3 long years. "Eliza!" Horace's voice boomed across the platform, causing her to freeze in terror. "Where do you think you're going, wife?" She turned slowly to see him stomping toward her, his face contorted with rage, his massive fists clenched at his sides. He was a large man, standing over 6 feet tall with shoulders like an ox. Next to him, Eliza's slender frame seemed almost childlike. "Please, Horace," she whispered, though she knew begging would do no good. It never had before. "Get home now," he growled, grabbing her arm with enough force to leave bruises. "Or so help me God, what I did to your face will seem like a loving caress." The train whistle blew, signaling its imminent departure. It was now or never. With a strength born of desperation, Eliza twisted from his grip and ran toward the nearest train car. She could hear Horace's heavy footsteps behind her, feel his rage like a physical force at her back. The conductor was already closing the doors when she reached the steps. "Please," she cried out, extending her ticket with a shaking hand. The man's eyes darted between her and the approaching Horace before he quickly pulled her aboard and slammed the door shut. The train lurched forward just as Horace reached for the handle. "Eliza!" His roar of fury followed her as the train picked up speed, carrying her away from the only life she had known since she was 20 years old. She collapsed onto a seat, trembling uncontrollably. For the first time in years, tears flowed freely down her face, stinging the cuts, but washing away the first layer of fear that had become as much a part of her as her own skin. The train rumbled eastward through the night, but Eliza knew she couldn't go east. Horace had family in Chicago. It would be the first place he'd look. When the train made its first stop in the small town of Red Creek just before dawn, Eliza disembarked. She needed to disappear, to go somewhere Horace would never think to look. Red Creek was little more than a dusty main street with a general store, saloon, and a handful of buildings that had seen better days. It wasn't much, but it was far enough from Pinewood to give her time to think. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky with strokes of pink and gold as Eliza made her way down the main street. Her body ached, her face throbbed, and exhaustion threatened to overtake her. She needed a place to rest, to hide. "You look like you could use some help, miss." The voice startled her, and she whirled around, heart pounding. A tall man stood a few paces away, leading a magnificent chestnut horse. He wore a weathered cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes, dusty denims, and a faded blue shirt. His face was partially obscured by several days' worth of stubble, but there was something in his stance, in the way he kept his distance, that didn't trigger the immediate fear she'd become accustomed to feeling around men. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied automatically, the lie falling from her lips with practiced ease. The man tilted his head slightly, his eyes a startling shade of blue taking in her bruised face, and the way she clutched her small bag like a shield. "No offense intended, madam, but you don't look fine." His voice was deep but gentle, with a slight drawl that marked him as not being from these parts originally. "Name's Zachary Hayes. Most folks call me Zach. I run the Hayes Ranch about 5 miles outside of town." Eliza remained silent, uncertainty keeping her rooted to the spot. This man, this stranger, could be just as dangerous as Horace. Yet something in his calm demeanor made her hesitate rather than flee. "My sister works at the boarding house just up the street," Zach continued, gesturing toward a modest 2-story building. "Sarah's good people. She can give you a room, no questions asked." "Why would you help me?" Eliza asked, suspicion evident in her voice. In her experience, men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. Zach's expression softened, a sadness flitting across his features. "Because my mother had bruises like yours once upon a time, and I wish someone had helped her." The simple honesty in his words broke through Eliza's defenses. She nodded slowly, allowing him to lead the way to the boarding house while maintaining a respectful distance between them. Sarah Hayes proved to be a kind-faced woman in her 30s with the same striking blue eyes as her brother. She took one look at Eliza and ushered her inside without prying, showing her to a small but clean room on the second floor. "You rest now," Sarah said, placing a basin of water and a clean cloth on the dresser. "I'll bring up some food later. No one will bother you here." For the first time in what felt like forever, Eliza found herself in a safe place. As the door closed behind Sarah, she sank onto the bed and finally allowed exhaustion to claim her. She slept for nearly 24 hours, waking only when Sarah brought meals that she barely touched before drifting back to sleep. It was as if her body, finally free from the constant state of fear, was catching up on years of restless nights. When Eliza finally emerged from her room on the 3rd day, her face was still bruised, but the swelling had begun to subside. She made her way downstairs to find Sarah kneading dough in the boarding house kitchen. "Good morning," Sarah greeted with a warm smile. "It's good to see you up and about. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," Eliza replied, her voice still soft and hesitant. I don't have much money, but I can work to pay for the room and food." Sarah wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron. "No need to worry about that just yet. Zach's taken care of it." Eliza stiffened. "I can't accept that. I don't want to be indebted to anyone, especially not a man I don't know." Understanding flashed in Sarah's eyes. "My brother doesn't expect anything in return, if that's what you're worried about. But if it makes you feel better, I could use some help around here. The girl who usually helps me left last month to get married." Relief washed over Eliza. Work meant independence, and independence meant safety. "Yes, I'd like that. Thank you." Over the next few weeks, Eliza settled into a routine at the boarding house. She helped Sarah with cooking, cleaning, and tending to the handful of long-term residents and occasional travelers who passed through Red Creek. The work was hard but honest, and Sarah proved to be not just an employer but a friend who respected Eliza's privacy and never pressed for details about her past. Zach Hayes visited the boarding house every few days, usually bringing fresh meat or vegetables from his ranch. He always greeted Eliza with a polite nod and a gentle smile, but never intruded on her space or pushed for conversation. Gradually, Eliza found herself less tense in his presence. One evening, as Eliza was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house, she heard the now familiar sound of Zach's horse approaching. She continued her work, not looking up until he spoke. "Evening, Miss Eliza," he said, tipping his hat. He still didn't know her last name. She hadn't offered it, and he hadn't asked. "Brought some fresh eggs from the ranch." "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," she replied, taking the basket he offered. Their fingers brushed briefly, and to her surprise, she didn't flinch away as she had become accustomed to doing. Zach seemed to notice too, a flicker of something approval, perhaps crossing his features. "Beautiful evening," he commented, looking up at the sky painted in hues of orange and purple as the sun began its descent. Eliza followed his gaze. "Yes, it is." For a moment, they stood in companionable silence, watching the sunset. "Miss Eliza," Zach began cautiously, "Sarah mentioned you've been having nightmares." Eliza's head snapped toward him, her body tensing. The nightmares had been frequent and vivid dreams of Horace finding her, of his hands around her throat, of being trapped once more in that house of horrors. "I didn't mean to pry," Zach added quickly, seeing her reaction. "It's just, I might have something that could help. My mother used to make a tea from chamomile and lavender. Helps calm the mind before sleep." The mention of his mother again, the woman with bruises like hers, softened Eliza's defensiveness. "That's very kind of you," Zach nodded, seeming to understand the significance of her not rejecting his offer outright. "I'll bring some by tomorrow, if that's all right." "Yes, thank you." As promised, Zach returned the next day with a small pouch of dried herbs, showing Eliza how to brew the tea properly. That night, after drinking a cup of the fragrant mixture, she slept more peacefully than she had in years. It became a routine, Zach bringing herbs every week, Eliza making the tea each night. Their interactions remained brief, but grew incrementally more comfortable. She learned that Zach had inherited the ranch from his father 5 years ago, that he had a talent for breaking wild horses, and that he was respected throughout the county for his fair dealings and hard work. As summer bloomed across the Wyoming territory, Eliza's physical wounds healed completely, leaving only the faintest scar across the bridge of her nose. The emotional wounds, however, ran deeper. She still startled at loud noises, still kept to herself, still watched the horizon with wary eyes, expecting Horace to appear at any moment. Sarah, observant as ever, noticed Eliza's constant vigilance. One afternoon, as they prepared vegetables for the evening meal, she broached the subject gently. "You know, Eliza, Red Creek is a small town, but folks here look out for each other. If there's someone you're afraid might come looking for you, people would help protect you." Eliza's knife stilled over the carrot she was chopping. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door, Sarah. You've already done so much for me." "Trouble has a way of finding folks whether they invite it or not," Sarah replied, her tone matter of fact. "Better to face it with friends than alone." Friends. The word resonated within Eliza. Was that what she had here? Friends? The concept seemed foreign after years of isolation under Horace's controlling thumb. "My husband," she finally said, the words feeling like stones in her mouth. "If he finds me, he won't let me go easily." Sarah nodded, as if confirming something she had already suspected. All the more reason not to face him alone. That evening, when Zach came by the boarding house, Sarah pulled him aside for a hushed conversation. Eliza watched from the kitchen doorway, anxiety rising as she guessed the topic of their discussion. Zach's expression grew serious as he listened to his sister, his jaw tightening and hands clenching at his sides. When Sarah finished speaking, he looked up and met Eliza's gaze across the room. Something passed between them, an understanding, a promise. The next day, Zach arrived at the boarding house earlier than usual, leading not one, but 2 horses. "Miss Eliza," he called from the yard, "I was wondering if you might join me for a ride this morning? It's a fine day, and there's something I'd like to show you." Eliza hesitated. She hadn't been on a horse since leaving Pinewood, hadn't ventured far from the safety of the boarding house at all. "Go on," Sarah encouraged with a gentle push. "Zach won't let any harm come to you, and some fresh air would do you good." Reluctantly, Eliza agreed, allowing Zach to help her mount the gentle mare he had brought for her. They rode out of town at an easy pace, Zach careful to keep a respectful distance while remaining close enough to converse. "I want to thank you for trusting Sarah with your situation," he said after they had left the town behind. "It can't have been easy." Eliza kept her eyes fixed on the path ahead. "She's been kind to me." "You both have." "Kindness costs nothing," Zach replied simply. And in these parts, it can be as essential as water in the desert. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the vast open landscape having a calming effect on Eliza's nerves. Eventually, they crested a small hill, and Zach brought his horse to a stop. "There it is," he said, gesturing to the valley below. "Hayes Ranch." Eliza followed his gaze to see a modest but well-kept homestead nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains. A main house, a large barn, several outbuildings, and corrals containing horses spread out across the property. Fields of hay and grazing cattle extended into the distance. "It's beautiful," she said truthfully, struck by the peaceful scene. "It's home," Zach replied, a note of pride in his voice. "Not grand by any means, but it's mine. Built most of it with my own 2 hands after taking over from my father." They continued down to the ranch, where Zach showed her around the property. Eliza found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about the horses and cattle, about how he managed such a large operation mostly on his own with just a few hired hands. "It's hard work," Zach admitted as they walked through the barn, "but rewarding. There's nothing quite like watching something you've nurtured grow and thrive." As he spoke, a magnificent black stallion in one of the stalls snorted and pawed at the ground, drawing Eliza's attention. "That's Midnight," Zach said, approaching the stall cautiously. "Still wild at heart, that one. Been trying to gentle him for weeks." Eliza stepped closer, something about the proud, untamed horse resonating with her. "He's afraid," she observed softly. Zach glanced at her curiously. "You know horses?" "A little. My father raised them when I was a girl." It was the first personal detail she had shared willingly, and the significance wasn't lost on either of them. "Would you like to try?" Zach asked, gesturing to the stallion. Sometimes a gentler touch is what's needed. Eliza hesitated only briefly before nodding. Carefully, she approached the stall, speaking in low, soothing tones. The stallion eyed her warily but didn't back away. "That's it," she murmured, slowly extending her hand. "No one's going to hurt you here." To Zach's amazement, Midnight stretched his neck out, nostrils flaring as he caught Eliza's scent. After a tense moment, the horse allowed her to touch his muzzle, snorting softly. "Well, I'll be," Zach breathed. "He hasn't let anyone but me get that close without putting up a fight." A small smile, the first genuine one Zach had seen from her, curved Eliza's lips. "He just needs patience and kindness. And to know he's safe." Their eyes met over the stall door, both aware she wasn't just talking about the horse. After that day, Eliza began accompanying Zach to the ranch regularly, finding comfort in the rhythm of ranch life and the company of the animals. She had a particular way with the horses, especially Midnight, who grew more accepting of human contact under her careful handling. For Zach, watching Eliza gradually emerge from her shell was like witnessing a flower bloom in slow motion, beautiful and miraculous. He was careful never to rush her, never to make her feel trapped or pressured. But as the weeks passed, he found himself increasingly drawn to her quiet strength, her gentle determination, and the rare smiles that transformed her face. One afternoon in late August, as they sat in the shade of a large oak tree after a morning of working with the horses, Zach found the courage to ask what had been on his mind. "Miss Eliza, I've been thinking. With winter coming on, Sarah will have fewer boarders, and she won't need as much help at the house." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I could use help here at the ranch, especially with the horses. They respond to you in a way I've never seen." Eliza looked at him questioningly. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Hayes?" "I am," he confirmed. "There's the old foreman's cabin that's sitting empty. It's small but sturdy, and it would be yours for as long as you want it. You'd have your privacy and independence, but you wouldn't be alone." The offer stunned Eliza. It was so much more than employment. It was sanctuary, security, a chance to rebuild her life on her own terms. "You don't have to decide right away," Zach added, seeing her conflicted expression. "Just think about it." Eliza did think about it, extensively, over the next few days. The idea both terrified and appealed to her. Living at the ranch would mean being further from town, more isolated. But it would also mean distance from the main road, making it less likely Horace would find her if he ever tracked her to Red Creek. And then there was Zach himself. She couldn't deny the comfort she found in his presence, the way her fear receded when he was near. He had never given her reason to doubt his intentions, had never made her feel unsafe or pressured. After a week of deliberation, Eliza gave Zach her answer as they rode back to town after another day at the ranch. "I'll accept your offer, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I insist on paying rent for the cabin." Zach smiled, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "How about this? You keep working with Midnight and the other horses, and we'll call it even. That stallion is worth his weight in gold if he can be properly trained." Eliza agreed to the arrangement, and the following week, she moved her few possessions into the foreman's cabin. It was indeed small, just one room with a bed, table, stove, and a few shelves, but it was clean and solid, with a small porch that faced east, allowing her to watch the sunrise each morning. The new arrangement suited them both. Eliza had the space and independence she needed to heal, while Zach had the satisfaction of knowing she was safe and the benefit of her remarkable way with the horses. They established a comfortable routine, working side by side during the day and retreating to their separate dwellings in the evening. As autumn painted the landscape in rich golds and reds, Eliza found herself settling into ranch life with unexpected ease. The physical work was demanding but satisfying, leaving her too tired for nightmares most nights. And Midnight, the once wild stallion, was responding beautifully to her gentle training methods. "He'll make a fine saddle horse soon," Zach commented one crisp October morning as they watched the stallion trot around the corral, now accepting a saddle without protest. "Though I'm thinking of keeping him for breeding. He's got good lines, strong constitution." Eliza nodded in agreement, her gaze fixed on the magnificent animal. "He deserves a good life after what he's been through." Zach studied her profile, noting the way the morning sunlight caught in her auburn hair, how her face had filled out now that she was eating regularly, how the perpetual tension in her shoulders had eased. "So do you," he said quietly, the words escaping before he could consider them. Eliza turned to him, surprise evident in her green eyes. For a moment, neither spoke, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. "I should check on the new foal," Eliza finally said, breaking the moment as she turned toward the barn. Zach watched her go, mentally chastising himself for pushing too fast. Patience, he reminded himself. She needs time. That evening, as Eliza prepared a simple dinner in her cabin, a knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Zach standing on the porch, holding a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Evening, Miss Eliza," he said, his hat in his hand. "Sorry to disturb you, but I thought you might want this before winter sets in proper." He extended the bundle toward her. Curious, Eliza unwrapped the oilcloth to reveal a beautifully crafted leather jacket, supple and well-made. "It was Sarah's," Zach explained. "She's got no use for it in town, and Wyoming winters are brutal. Thought it might serve you better out here." Touched by the thoughtful gesture, Eliza ran her fingers over the soft leather. "Thank you. That's very kind. Would you try it on? To make sure it fits?" Zach asked, a hint of nervousness in his typically confident demeanor. Eliza slipped the jacket on, finding it a near-perfect fit. The weight of it felt reassuring, protective. "It suits you," Zach said softly, his blue eyes warm with admiration. Something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle but significant change in the air. For the first time since meeting him, Eliza allowed herself to truly see Zach not just as a kind employer or a safe presence, but as a man. A handsome, decent man whose gaze made her feel not afraid, but valued. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" she found herself asking. "It's nothing fancy, just stew, but there's plenty." Zach's smile could have lit up the darkening sky. "I'd like that very much." They shared a simple meal at Eliza's small table, their conversation flowing more easily than ever before. Zach told stories of growing up on the ranch, of the trouble he and Sarah had gotten into as children, of his dreams for the future of Hayes Ranch. Eliza mostly listened, but occasionally shared small details of her own childhood in Pennsylvania, before her parents died, and she was sent west to live with an aunt who had been all too eager to marry her off at 20. As the hour grew late, Zach reluctantly rose to leave. At the door, he turned to Eliza, hesitation evident in his stance. "Miss Eliza, I've been meaning to ask, would it be all right if I called you by your first name? And perhaps you could call me Zach, instead of Mr. Hayes." The request was simple, but represented a new level of familiarity between them. Eliza considered it for a moment before nodding. Yes, I think I'd like that. Zach. His name felt strange yet right on her lips, like a key turning in a long rusted lock. Good night, Eliza, he replied, his voice warm as he stepped into the cool night air. Thank you for dinner. Good night, Zach. As winter descended upon Wyoming territory, bringing with it howling winds and heavy snow, life at Hayes Ranch fell into a new rhythm. The days grew shorter, the work more focused on maintenance and survival rather than expansion. Zach and Eliza spent more time indoors, mending tack, taking inventory, and planning for spring. Their dinners together became a regular occurrence, sometimes at her cabin, sometimes at the main house. With each passing day, Eliza found herself opening up more, sharing pieces of herself that she had kept locked away. She told Zach about meeting Horace, how he had seemed so charming and protective at first, how gradually his true nature had emerged after their wedding, how the violence had escalated until that final night when she knew she had to flee or die. Zach listened without judgment, his anger at what she had endured evident only in the tightening of his jaw and the careful way he kept his distance on the nights when talking about her past left her raw and vulnerable. In turn, he shared his own pain, the memory of his father's brutality toward his mother, how helpless he had felt as a boy, how his mother had eventually succumbed to illness exacerbated by years of abuse, how he had vowed never to become like his father. Is that why you've never married? Eliza asked one snowy evening as they sat before the fire in the main house, mugs of coffee warming their hands. Zach considered the question, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Partly, he admitted, and partly because I never met anyone I wanted to build a life with. Not until he stopped abruptly, taking a sip of his coffee. Not until you. The unspoken words hung in the air between them. Eliza felt her cheeks warm, and it wasn't from the fire. The realization that Zach cared for her, as more than a friend or employee, had been gradually dawning on her for weeks. What surprised her more was the discovery that she welcomed his feelings, that they didn't frighten her as she had expected. Yet the shadow of Horace still loomed in her mind. She was still legally his wife, still technically a fugitive from her marriage. And more than that, she wasn't sure she could ever trust enough to give her heart to another man, even one as kind and patient as Zachary Hayes. As if sensing her thoughts, Zach spoke quietly. I don't expect anything from you, Eliza. Your friendship is more than enough. I just want you to know that you're safe here, in every way. The sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to Eliza's eyes. Thank you, she whispered, unable to articulate the complex emotions his words evoked. December brought Christmas, and with it, a rare visit from Sarah, who braved the snow-covered roads to spend the holiday at the ranch. Her presence brightened the house, bringing laughter and warmth to rooms that had been too quiet for too long. On Christmas Eve, after a hearty dinner prepared by all three of them, they gathered in the main room where Zach had set up a small pine tree decorated with handmade ornaments and candles. I have something for each of you, Sarah announced, producing 2 packages wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Zach's gift was a new leather-bound journal to replace his old one that was nearly full of ranch records and plans. For Eliza, Sarah had brought a beautiful woolen shawl in shades of green that complemented her eyes. It's lovely, Eliza said, draping it around her shoulders. Thank you, Sarah. Your turn, big brother, Sarah prompted, turning to Zach with expectant eyes. Zach cleared his throat nervously before retrieving a small box from behind the tree. This is for you, Eliza. It's not much, but... Eliza accepted the box with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, lay a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a horse, suspended on a simple chain. Zach, she breathed, lifting the necklace from the box. It's beautiful. I had it made in Cheyenne last month, he explained, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. The silversmith there does fine work. I thought, well, it reminded me of you and Midnight. How you helped each other heal. Eliza's heart swelled with emotion. It was the most thoughtful gift she had ever received, chosen with such care and understanding of who she was. Would you help me put it on? She asked, holding out the necklace. Zach moved to stand behind her, taking the delicate chain from her hands. His fingers brushed against her neck as he fastened the clasp, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. There, he said softly, stepping back. It suits you. Eliza touched the pendant where it rested just below her collarbone, a tangible reminder of how far she had come since that terrifying night in Pinewood. I have something for you too, she said, retrieving a package from beside her chair. It's not as fine as your gift, but… Zach unwrapped the package to reveal a pair of leather gloves, expertly crafted and lined with rabbit fur. I made them, Eliza explained. I noticed your old ones were wearing through at the fingertips. Zach stared at the gloves in wonder. You made these? When? In the evenings, after you'd gone home, she replied, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. Do you like them? Like them? Eliza, they're perfect. He slipped them on, flexing his fingers to feel the supple leather. Best gift I've ever received. Sarah watched the exchange with a knowing smile, her eyes moving between her brother and the woman who had so clearly captured his heart. Later, as she helped Eliza wash the dishes while Zach tended to a final check on the animals before the night's forecasted storm, she broached the subject gently. My brother cares for you very deeply, you know. Eliza's hands stilled in the soapy water. I know, she admitted quietly. And you? How do you feel about him? It was a question Eliza had been asking herself with increasing frequency. I care for him too. But it's complicated. Sarah nodded understandingly. Because of your husband. Yes. And because… Eliza hesitated, struggling to articulate her fears. Because I'm afraid of making the same mistake twice. Of trusting the wrong man. Zach isn't perfect, Sarah said honestly. He's stubborn and sometimes too proud for his own good. But he's a good man, Eliza. The kind who would cut off his own hand before raising it against a woman. Eliza knew this to be true. In all the months she had known Zach, through all their work together with unpredictable animals and stressful conditions, she had never seen him lose his temper, never witnessed even a hint of the rage that had been Horace's constant companion. I know, she whispered. I just need time. Sarah squeezed her arm gently. Time is something Zach has plenty of. He waited 30 years to find someone like you. He'll wait as long as it takes for you to be ready. The winter storm that night was one of the worst in recent memory, with howling winds that rattled the windows and snow that piled in drifts against the doors. Eliza lay awake in the guest room of the main house, where Zach had insisted she stay rather than return to her cabin in such dangerous conditions. She could hear the wind's mournful cry, so similar to the sound that had haunted her dreams for months, Horace calling her name across the train platform. But tonight, for the first time, the memory didn't fill her with paralyzing fear. Instead, she found herself thinking of Zach, his gentle hands, his patient smile, the way he looked at her as if she were something precious. Perhaps Sarah was right. Perhaps it was time to stop letting fear of the past dictate her future. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Eliza made her way downstairs to find Zach already up, stoking the fire in the main room. Morning, he greeted with a smile. Sleep well. Better than I expected, she replied truthfully. The storm didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. Good. That's good. He hesitated, then added, I need to check on the animals, make sure everything weathered the storm all right. Would you like to come with me? The snow's deep, but it's beautiful out there. Eliza agreed, and after a quick breakfast, they bundled up in their warmest clothes and stepped out into a world of blinding white. The snow reached nearly to Eliza's knees in places, making walking a challenge. Here, Zach said, offering his arm for support. Lean on me. After only a moment's hesitation, Eliza took his arm, feeling the solid strength of him even through layers of winter clothing. Together, they made their way to the barn, where the horses nickered in greeting. Midnight was particularly animated, snorting and pawing at the ground when he saw Eliza. She approached his stall, speaking softly as she always did. He missed you, Zach observed, watching the interaction with a smile. I missed him too, Eliza admitted, stroking the stallion's velvety nose. All of this, actually. She gestured around the barn, at the life they had built here. Zach's expression softened. It's a good life. Simple but good. Yes, Eliza agreed. It is. They worked side by side, checking on each animal, ensuring water troughs weren't frozen and that the hay supply was accessible. When they finished, Zach suggested they check on Eliza's cabin to make sure the roof had held up under the weight of the snow. The short walk to the cabin was made difficult by the deep snow, and more than once, Eliza found herself clutching Zach's arm for balance. By the time they reached the small structure, they were both breathing hard from the exertion. "Looks like it held up fine," Zach said, examining the roof from outside. "Let's check inside to make sure nothing leaked." The cabin was cold but dry, with no signs of water damage. Zach immediately set about starting a fire in the small stove while Eliza checked her few possessions. "Everything seems to be in order," she reported, turning back to find Zach watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Eliza," he began, his voice low and serious. "There's something I need to say to you. Something I've been wanting to say for a while now." Her heart began to race, but not with fear. "What is it?" Zach took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "I care for you, more than I've ever cared for anyone. I know you've been through hell, and I know you might not be ready to hear this. But I need you to know that if you ever are ready, if you ever want more than friendship, I'm here. And I'll wait, however long it takes." Eliza stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability in his stance. This strong, capable man was laying his heart bare before her, asking for nothing in return but the chance to love her someday. "Zach, she began, then faltered, unsure how to express the complex tangle of emotions within her. "You don't have to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I don't expect an answer. I just wanted you to know." But as he turned to leave, something within Eliza rebelled against letting him go without a response. She had spent too long silenced by fear, too long letting others determine her fate. "Wait," she called, her voice stronger than she expected. "Please." Zach paused, turning back to face her with carefully controlled hope in his eyes. "I care for you too," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm afraid, and I'm not sure I know how to do this, how to trust again. But if you're willing to be patient with me, to help me learn how to love without fear, then I want to try." The smile that broke across Zach's face was like the sun emerging from behind storm clouds, brilliant and warm. "I am willing," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than willing." He took a step toward her, then hesitated, clearly wanting to close the distance between them, but unsure if she was ready. Eliza made the decision for him, stepping forward until only inches separated them. Slowly, telegraphing his movements to give her time to retreat if she wished, Zach raised his hand to her face. His fingers were gentle as they traced the faint scar on the bridge of her nose, a permanent reminder of the night she had fled Pinewood. "You are the bravest person I've ever known," he murmured. Then, with infinite tenderness, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. It was a promise, not a demand, an offering, not a taking. When they broke apart, Eliza found herself trembling, not with fear, but with a powerful mixture of hope and possibility. For the first time in years, she could imagine a future not defined by survival, but by joy. "We'll take it slow," Zach promised, his forehead resting against hers. "One day at a time. One day at a time." Eliza agreed, her heart lighter than it had been since before she met Horace Morgan. As winter gradually gave way to spring, Eliza and Zach's relationship blossomed like the wildflowers that began to the Wyoming landscape. True to his word, Zach was patient, never pushing for more than Eliza was ready to give, celebrating each small victory as she learned to trust again. The first time she reached for his hand without prompting. The first time she sought him out for comfort after a nightmare. The first time she fell asleep beside him on the porch swing, her head trustingly on his shoulder. By April, Eliza had moved permanently into the main house, though they maintained separate bedrooms. Their days were filled with the demanding work of the ranch, their evenings with quiet conversations and increasingly confident displays of affection. But as Eliza's happiness grew, so too did her anxiety about the legal bind that still tied her to Horace. She was still his wife in the eyes of the law, still his property according to the customs of the time. The specter of his potential reappearance in her life cast a shadow over her budding relationship with Zach. It was Sarah who finally suggested a solution during one of her visits to the ranch. "You need a divorce," she stated plainly as the three of them sat at the kitchen table after dinner. "It's the only way you'll ever truly be free of him." Eliza's hands tightened around her coffee cup, Is that even possible? Women don't often win divorce cases, especially when they're the ones who left. It's not common, Sarah acknowledged, but it's not impossible either, especially if you can prove cruelty. And your face when you arrived in Red Creek would have been evidence enough for any reasonable judge. But I'd have to go before a court, Eliza said, the fear evident in her voice. He would be notified. He would know where I am. Zach, who had been listening silently, reached across the table to cover her hand with his. You wouldn't face him alone, Eliza. Not this time. The determination in his voice gave her courage. I'll think about it, she promised. The decision was made for her a week later when a letter arrived from Pinewood. It was addressed to Eliza Morgan, care of the Red Creek General Store, and had been forwarded to the ranch by the storekeeper who knew she worked there. Eliza's hands shook as she opened the envelope, Zach standing protectively nearby. The letter was from Martha Wilson, the wife of the doctor in Pinewood. Dear Mrs. Morgan, it began. I am writing to inform you that your husband, Horace Morgan, passed away 3 weeks ago following an accident at the lumber mill. He had been drinking heavily since your departure and was careless with the equipment. The town council has decided to sell your home to cover his outstanding debts. If you wish to claim any personal belongings, you must return to Pinewood within the month. If we do not hear from you, we will assume you have no interest in the property. Regards, Martha Wilson. Eliza read the letter twice, unable to process the emotions that flooded through her. Relief, certainly, but also a strange grief, not for the man who had caused her so much pain, but for the young woman she had been, full of hope when she married him, and for the life that might have been if he had been the man she initially thought him to be. He's dead, she finally said, looking up at Zach. Horace is dead. Zach's expression was solemn as he took the letter she offered, reading it quickly. Are you all right? He asked, his concern focused entirely on her well-being rather than the implications for their relationship. I think so, Eliza replied, surprised to find it was true. I don't feel joy at his death, but I do feel relief that he can never hurt me again. Zach nodded understandingly. That's natural. He was your husband, for better or worse. Mostly worse, Eliza said with a sad smile. But yes, he was my husband. And now I'm free. The realization hit her fully then. She was free not just from Horace's physical presence, but from the legal bonds that had tied her to him. Free to build a new life, to love again, to be the woman she was meant to be before fear and pain had nearly broken her. What do you want to do? Zach asked gently. About your belongings in Pinewood? Eliza considered the question. There was little in that house she wanted to reclaim. Most of it carried memories she'd rather forget. But there were a few items: her mother's Bible, a quilt her grandmother had made, a small music box that had been a gift from her father. I should go back, she decided. Just long enough to collect a few personal things. Then I can truly close that chapter of my life. I'll go with you, Zach said immediately, his tone making it clear this wasn't up for debate. Eliza nodded, grateful beyond words for his steadfast support. They made the journey to Pinewood the following week, traveling by train and then renting a buggy for the final stretch. As they approached the town, Eliza's anxiety mounted, memories of her last night there flooding back with painful clarity. Zach seemed to sense her distress, reaching across to take her hand. Remember, he's gone. He can't hurt you anymore. And I'm right here beside you. The town looked smaller than Eliza remembered, less intimidating in the bright spring sunshine. They drove directly to the Wilson home, where Martha greeted Eliza with genuine warmth. Mrs. Morgan, I'm so glad you received my letter. And this is... She looked questioningly at Zach. Zachary Hayes, he introduced himself, a friend of Mrs. Morgan's. Martha's knowing gaze suggested she suspected there was more to their relationship than friendship, but she made no comment. I've had the house kept locked since Horace's passing, she explained as they walked toward the Morgan residence. No one has disturbed anything. The small house where Eliza had spent 3 years of her life looked shabby and neglected from the outside. As Martha unlocked the door, the musty smell of an uninhabited home greeted them. I'll leave you to gather your things, Martha said kindly. Take all the time you need. The house won't be sold for at least another week. As the door closed behind Martha, Eliza stood frozen in the entryway, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. This place had been both home and prison, the site of brief moments of happiness and long stretches of terror. We can leave if this is too difficult, Zach offered, his hand a reassuring presence on her back. Eliza shook her head. No, I need to do this. For closure. Room by room, she moved through the house, collecting the few items that held meaning for her, while leaving behind everything associated with Horace. In the bedroom, she paused before the cracked mirror where she had last seen her bruised face on the night of her escape. This is where I decided to leave, she told Zach, who had followed at a respectful distance. I looked at myself and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. That's when I knew I had to go or die trying. Zach's reflection appeared beside hers in the mirror, his expression a mixture of sorrow for what she had endured and profound respect for her courage. I'm glad you found the strength, he said simply. They spent less than an hour in the house, emerging with a small trunk containing Eliza's treasured possessions. As they prepared to leave town, Martha Wilson approached with an envelope. The sale of the house covered most of Horace's debts, she explained, but there was a small amount left over. The town council agreed it should go to you, as his widow. Eliza accepted the envelope with surprise. It wasn't a large sum, but it was something that was truly hers, perhaps the first money she had ever possessed that wasn't controlled by someone else. Thank you, Martha, for everything. As their buggy pulled away from Pinewood, Eliza didn't look back. That chapter of her life was closed now, the pages turned. Ahead lay an open road and a future of her own choosing. The journey back to Red Creek and Hayes Ranch felt lighter somehow, as if Eliza had left behind more than just a house in Pinewood. They arrived home, and it was home now, truly as the sun was setting, painting the Wyoming sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. That night, as they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the stars emerge one by one, Zach turned to Eliza with a question in his eyes. Now that everything's settled, I was wondering if you might consider making a change. Eliza looked at him curiously. What kind of change? Zach cleared his throat nervously. Well, I was thinking that Morgan doesn't suit you anymore. Never did, really. It took a moment for Eliza to understand what he was suggesting. When she did, her heart began to race, not with fear, but with anticipation. Zach, she whispered, are you asking what I think you're asking? He shifted to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Eliza, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You're the strongest, most beautiful soul I've ever known. I love watching you with the horses, love seeing you smile when you think no one's looking, love the way you've made this ranch feel like a real home. Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band set with a modestly sized emerald that caught the last light of day. I love you, Eliza. I have for a long time now. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Of becoming Eliza Hayes? Tears filled Eliza's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. 6 months ago, the thought of marrying again would have terrified her. But Zach had shown her that love didn't have to hurt, that a man's strength could be used to protect rather than harm, that she deserved gentleness and respect. Yes, she said, her voice steady and sure. Yes, I would love to be your wife, Zachary Hayes. The smile that lit Zach's face was brilliant enough to rival the emerging stars. With reverent care, he slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward to seal their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Sarah, a few neighbors, and the local preacher in attendance. Eliza wore a new dress of sky blue silk that Sarah had helped her select, and Zach wore his best suit, freshly pressed for the occasion. As they stood beneath an arch of spring flowers, exchanging vows to love and cherish one another for all their days, Eliza felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long and difficult journey. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Zach's lips met hers in their first kiss as a married couple, she knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. The small gathering celebrated with food, music, and dancing well into the evening. As twilight descended, Zach took Eliza's hand and led her away from the festivities toward the corral where midnight was kept. I have a wedding gift for you, he said, a hint of mischief in his smile. To Eliza's surprise, Midnight was saddled and waiting, his coat gleaming in the fading light. He's yours, Zach said simply. You two understand each other. It seems right that he should belong to you now. Overcome with emotion, Eliza approached the stallion, who nickered softly in greeting. "Thank you," she whispered, stroking the horse's neck. "He's perfect." "There's one more thing," Zack added, leading her around to the other side of the corral where a second horse waited, a beautiful chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face. "This is Sunrise. I thought maybe tomorrow, if you're willing, we could ride out together. There's a spot up in the hills I'd like to show you. A place I thought might be perfect for building a new home someday. Our home." Eliza's heart swelled with love for this man who continued to give her choices, who included her in his dreams for the future, who saw her as a partner rather than a possession. "I'd like that very much," she said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him beneath the vast Wyoming sky. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered a new dimension to their relationship, one built on trust, mutual desire, and the deep love that had grown between them over the months. Zack was as gentle and considerate in this most intimate act as he had been in all other aspects of their relationship, ensuring Eliza's comfort and pleasure were his primary concern. For Eliza, the experience was a revelation. Where intimacy with Horace had been something to endure, with Zack it became something to cherish, a physical expression of the bond they shared. As they lay together afterward, Eliza's head resting on Zack's chest, his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed in the span of a year. From terror and despair to safety and joy, from a woman broken to a woman whole. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Hayes?" Zack asked softly, his fingers playing with a strand of her auburn hair. The new name sent a thrill through her. "About how lucky I am to have found you. About how different everything is now." Zack's arms tightened around her. "I'm the lucky one. You could have let what happened break you completely. Instead, you found the courage to start again. That's remarkable, Eliza." "I had help," she reminded him, thinking of his patient kindness, of Sarah's friendship, of Midnight's silent understanding. "I wasn't alone. And you never will be again," Zack promised, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Not as long as I'm breathing." The years that followed were not without challenges. Building a successful ranch in the Wyoming territory required hard work, perseverance, and the ability to weather both literal and figurative storms. But Eliza and Zack faced each obstacle together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. They built their new home on the hill Zack had shown her the day after their wedding, a spacious, comfortable house with wide windows that captured the spectacular views in every direction. It was there, 2 years into their marriage, that Eliza gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Grace, who inherited her mother's green eyes and her father's determined spirit. A son, William, followed 2 years later, and eventually a second daughter, Sarah, named for her beloved aunt. The Hayes children grew up surrounded by love, taught by their parents' example that strength could be gentle and that true courage often lay in kindness. Eliza never forgot the woman she had been, the frightened, broken creature who had stepped off a train in Red Creek with nothing but terror and determination in her heart. That woman was part of her story, a testament to her resilience. But she was no longer defined by what had been done to her. Instead, she defined herself by what she had built: a loving marriage, a thriving family, a successful ranch, a life rich with purpose and joy. And on quiet evenings, when she and Zack sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play and the sun set over the land they loved, Eliza would touch the small silver horse pendant she still wore around her neck and give thanks for second chances. For a nose that had been broken but had healed stronger. For a spirit that had been wounded but had found its way back to joy. And for the cowboy who had helped her breathe again, who had shown her that love, true love, was not about possession or control, but about freedom and flight, like a wild horse finally running unafraid across the vast, open plains of possibility.